I don't know if you were there for the vote.
Well, it would have extended, yeah. Okay. That was the only really big thing, right? Besides golf being excitingly above projections, right? Okay.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started with our directors meeting. We'll start off with any adjustments to the agenda. Is there going to be like any changes to the agenda, or how
We're talking, that's this agenda we're talking about.
Oh, this agenda.
Yeah.
I'm getting ahead of myself. Thanks, Roy.
Yep.
Any adjustments to the agenda? We're going to hold off on the DLA update, and we'll hold off on the Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal update, and we'll hold off on the Multicultural Advisory Committee update due to absences. Move on to the city clerk.
Okay, for today's agenda, I'll be calling items 1A through 1F separately. And then items 2A through 2I are setting hearing dates. I'll call those together. It will be introduced by Christensen. For public hearing resolutions, item 5B, there is a motion to amend number 1 to accept a substitute resolution. And then for resolutions first reading, item 8E will have a suspension of rules to have hearing and action today. And on the memo that I had sent earlier to council, first readings, ordinances and resolutions will be introduced by Christensen. And there was an error with open mic. That's not today. That will be on Monday, September 21st. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Any questions for city clerk? All right, we'll move on into the next part, and I see that Mayor Gaylor Baird is here to talk to us about things going on with the mayor's office. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the council. Thank you for having me down here. I just wanted to say that thank you so much for what you're planning to do at the council meeting at 3 today. On behalf of Investigator Mario Herrera, I'll be back down to speak on that item, but thank you to those of you who were able to attend the service this weekend. It was such an incredible outpouring of support, and appreciate what you're doing to help our community grieve and heal in the coming days and weeks. So thank you. I just had a couple of items. I just thought I would just touch base on the directed health measure. You know, as you're aware, we've extended and updated our DHM through the end of the month. We've seen an increase in cases with students returning to our community. The health department is working closely with our institutions of higher education to manage that transition, but we are in this state of transition, and you know, it's also being a bit complicated by some of the technical challenges with Test Nebraska results that we've had intermittently over the Labor Day weekend and actually over this weekend. So the numbers you saw reported yesterday did not include any results from Test Nebraska from midnight Saturday to when the release went out in the afternoon. So we'll see higher numbers likely in today's case reporting based on the fact that there was a lag. Working with the state to try and get that corrected as quickly as possible. No one's happy about it, but it's obviously a challenge as we try to quickly quarantine, isolate, and contact trace it. Any delay in receiving lab results loses precious time. And with that in mind, thank you for continuing to reinforce the safety messages about washing your hands and watching your distance and wearing masks, as that is so critical to keeping people safe and is clearly doing its good work in our schools. Both LPS and others in the county are seeing good results in managing COVID-19, and we're not seeing outbreaks or widespread transmission in our schools. So more evidence that these proven public health practices really matter. As you know, your moratorium on transitional living facilities is still in place, and the planning department's been working diligently to get more public feedback on the proposed text amendment. So thank you for your work there. Tonight at Mayor's Neighborhood Roundtable at 5:30, of course, all welcome to come and know about that, but planning will be getting feedback in that venue tonight, as well as at the Near South Neighborhood Association. And then you'll see that appear on the Planning Commission agenda on September 30th, followed by you on October 26th. Wanted to just let you know that the fire chief search is underway. We obviously had to take a pause during the height of our efforts to manage our emergency situation. And now that we are resuming that search, we have a list of initial interviews that will be taking place next week to help narrow down to a group of finalists. And once we have those finalists, we'll contact you to make sure you're aware of who they are, where they're from, and when they'll be in town or here virtually, to be determined. And then last but not least, another public health message that we'd appreciate help getting out there is to make a plan to get your flu shots, all of you included. So really that's so important and will help our public health team. It'll help our community, certainly help everyone who's trying to manage this within their institutions to help avoid the double whammy of COVID and the flu. And what the good news is we've seen from the Southern Hemisphere, who've been going through the winter months while we've been enjoying summer, is that all these preventative practices to avoid the transmission of COVID-19 are having additional benefits in preventing spread of flu. So that's the good news. Any questions?
You don't have any questions for Mayor? Yes, Councilwoman Raybould?
Mayor, if we would like to participate in the Mayor's Roundtable, is it through Zoom or?
It is through Zoom, and
Okay.
I believe that Angie has the link, but if not, we can make sure that you're able to access that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that would be great. Thank you very much.
It's funny, I was picturing it in my mind as in the conference room. Still have to remember that things are not the same for now.
Does
Because I
anyone
think since we don't have open or public comment tonight, then we might be able to listen in, because I think it's pretty important we hear what the neighborhood associations
Yeah.
are thinking.
No, that group's been meeting regularly, and we value their input.
Any other questions for Mayor? All right,
Okay.
thank you so much, Mayor Gaylor Baird, for coming out.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we have Director Correspondence, and it looks like we have Director Pat Lopez with the Health Department.
Good afternoon. I think the mayor gave you a good summary of what's happening with our testing results coming back. But just to give you a little idea, our 7-day rolling average for daily cases in Lancaster County increased from 19 cases a day on August 19th to 98 cases a day as of yesterday. So we can see that's a huge increase in the last 4 weeks. We have 442 cases associated with universities, colleges, and we've met, we have a meeting tomorrow again with Union College and Wesleyan. Wesleyan has testing on site, as does the university, and the university is working hard to expand their testing to 2,500 a week. So we feel that will be really helpful. We talk with the university every day about what's happening and make adjustments as needed. We're also working with our nursing homes, and I'll give you some additional updates. They're moving into a different type of testing requirement from Centers for Medicaid, Medicare, and it's created quite a bit of confusion based on the positivity rate in the community. CMS is, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare, is requiring the amount of testing they must do. So for example, if your positivity rate in the community is over 10%, that means you must test staff and potentially residents twice a week. They've sent out some machines to do this testing, but there's a limited supply of those tests. So we've been really working through that a great deal. Last week we had our first meeting of our vaccine committee, and we're talking about our recommendations in the community from our healthcare providers related to doing COVID and influenza testing simultaneously. We're working on messaging for influenza vaccine, so we have a common message across the community. We're talking about our priority areas for vaccination when it becomes available for COVID, to give you an idea of a little bit about that. We intend to have 2 more meetings and then put forth some recommendations from there. We also remain in close contact with the Healthcare Association, which works directly with our long-term care and assisted livings in our community. Our positivity rate is 13.2% this week, ending on Saturday. So we're up. We were close to 5.7. We want to get back down there so that we can continue to move on. I think the mayor mentioned some of the changes we've made to the DHM to clarify language, and one of the things that we put in is additional language to open up buffets with some extra disinfecting processes so that some of those businesses can get back to work in the community.
Any questions for Director Lopez? Councilwoman Washington?
Director Lopez, thank you. This has been enlightening, but I have a question about the assisted living and the increased testing because of community positivity rate. Does the Center for Medicaid, Medicare Payment, or whatever, do they have penalties, or they're just encouraging people to do this?
No, it's a requirement.
It's a requirement.
And so the state is working with language so that those facilities can verify, say that they're working towards it, but that they don't have either the materials to do the testing yet or the staffing to do that. And a lot of this would be a saliva test, so we're just still, but it's a huge concern and burden.
Yes.
Councilwoman Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pat, I have a question regarding our seniors. I've read both ways that they should get their influenza vaccines as soon as possible because flu season's approaching and because of COVID. I've also read they should wait till the 1st of October because that way it will last longer into the spring, their vaccination. Do you have a strong sense, or is it just specific to the patient?
It's specific to the populations, but we're really recommending the rollout after October 1st.
Okay.
And we actually have representation from the Healthcare Association, and Christy Heinrichs is serving on our committee, as well as Randy Jones. So to help in talking with some of our healthcare providers about what we can do best. I can give you a more detailed report next week, but we secured a great deal of vaccine that we'll be able to bring into the community. We're making arrangements at 4 of our junior highs that have feeder schools that come in to them to do not only provide flu vaccine for the students and their parents, and also update the students on any immunizations they've missed. So I can give you more report the next time I visit with you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councilwoman Raybould?
Director Lopez, thanks so much for the update, but I know we continue to hear in the paper and other sources that the university population is the one that's a problem. And I don't know if you're in your contact tracing, you've determined, is it, I guess what we see is it's from sororities and fraternities, but is it also further, is it from them frequenting different bars? How are our bar owners doing in maintaining compliance? And what other mitigating steps would you recommend that we take for some of the university students?
We worked with the university quite a bit, and of course we have a campaign going into the university about masking, jointly working with them in the city of Lincoln. Our bar, and I think some of our council members were able to see that, for the large part they're working very hard to be in compliance. We're still doing surveillance and following up when we have complaints. The other thing I should mention that raised our rates, and thank you for asking me that, is that they're doing testing at the state penitentiary or through corrections. So we've also had an increase in the number of cases, probably over 50 cases associated with inmates who are residing there. That's added to our numbers as well. So we'll be reporting more. We're working on some graphics to show where we are in the community, but the university students too, we've implemented with the colleges, all of them, higher education, students that will need to be tested every other week, students that will need to be tested weekly or every month that are going into the school, our K through 12 school system. That's one of our mitigation strategies because we have not had classroom spread in our schools, and totally we have probably about 95 staff and students who have been positive since school opened, and considering our numbers are well over 50,000, that's really reassuring. Our goal is to keep our students in school and get our businesses move forward.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all your work, Director Lopez. All right, we'll do the boards and committee reports, and then we'll break for council members who need to talk to department heads. First one on our agenda is the Internal Liquor Committee with Councilwoman Washington and Councilman Christensen.
So we did, as mentioned by Director Lopez, have a 4th of September kind of walk around, maybe a walkabout. A walkabout. Good term.
I like that. Thank you.
And we started off down at the rail yard, took a look at what was going on there, and then walked down around the downtown bars and looked at some bars and restaurants and how they were operating. There were mostly a lot of good efforts that I saw, but there were a couple places where they need to do better. I won't necessarily mention them, but we're working on seeing if we can help them out a little bit. Sandra?
That's a fair assessment, Councilman Christensen. It seems like, for the most part, owners are doing their very best to adhere to the DHM, and really just a few places that need to do better. And we discussed a couple things down at the rail yard. That doesn't mean that they need to do better, but we discussed a couple of things at the rail yard, and I think we'll be coming forward with a recommendation that we keep the dine out going for just a smidge longer while we have nice weather.
Great. Moving. Any questions about the Internal Liquor Committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the Performance Audit Committee with Councilman Christensen, Schob, and myself. Councilman Christensen?
Well, we kind of started out by finishing up on our look at the handy vans service, the transition we've had, and we heard in our last meeting about some of the issues that maybe are getting resolved, that were pointed out previously about leadership and the depth of leadership that is present in taking care of issues for StarTran drivers. But the main conclusion is, with all of the COVID-19 things going on, there was not enough of information available to us and not enough experience going on out there to really nail down any solid recommendations. So what we do need to take a look at is a subject for this next year. And we talked about looking at overtime accounting and controls in the payroll process in the city. So that's probably going to be forthcoming as a recommendation from the Performance Audit Committee to the Council in general.
Thank you. Moving on to the Problem Resolution Team. We did not meet this past month. which I'm on that committee. Moving on to the Board of Health, which I am on that committee. As we know, health equity is a goal of our health department, and as we know, our zip code can impact our health outcomes. So the Board of Health, which is an advisory board to the health department, did a formal resolution encouraging the health department to include people in decision making and using data to tackle health disparities and to partner with the public to co-create solutions. And so we signed a formal resolution addressing racism, socioeconomic status, and using data to partner with our community. Moving on to the Public Building Commission, Councilwoman Raybould, do you have an update for us on that?
Yes, we met and we actually had quite a brief meeting because we just needed to get an update on the Hall of Justice, the new security entrance. They had requested an additional month delay for substantial completion due to just materials, hard to get materials that they needed to complete the project, but that we're looking for a final completion in October, which is terrific. The month before, we did have a tour of the county assessor's office and the remodel that took place, which was really nice to see that happen. And then we had Chief Deputy Todd Duncan come in and present, again, honoring the fallen, because there's some people that had not seen the presentation in the joint committee, so the city council and the county board. And I think he demonstrated the preferred location, which is in between the trees, and that is, they're waiting approval from the Capital Environs Committee, but they do anticipate moving forward. They are seeing the funding come in quite well, and they're hoping to obviously have a reserve for the upkeep and maintenance of it, and they're looking at just further protections to make sure that there is no vandalism on the two bronze statues that they would like to have. Otherwise, it was truly a very routine meeting.
Thank you. Moving on to the Railroad Transportation Safety District with Councilman Raybould, Councilman Christensen, and myself. Do either of you have a specific update that you want to share?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the main interest I think the public has is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad contract to take coal down to Nebraska City. And I think it's important people realize that this is a right-of-way that the railroad has. They've maintained that right-of-way, and I'll say this in the best possible way. They're not asking us if they can do this. They are informing us how they tend to go about it and being very nice about it, and trying to work with us as a community to make sure the impact is minimal. There's things they're willing to do, and there's certain things that they feel they're not able to do. I think some of the biggest concerns as they come down out of Hobson Yard going parallel to Highway 2, once we get to 56th Street and then going east and south from there, that line is owned at that point by OPPD. And there are some concerns that we need to be addressing, and we are addressing at the Railroad Transportation Safety District about the crossings there to make sure they are safe. Keep in mind this is one train going down full and one train coming back empty every day. And while it's something we're not used to, we can also point to experience up along the Cornhusker Highway and say there are over 30 trains a day up there, and we seem to manage okay. So there's changes coming, and the railroad is working with us, and we're going to try to get the best outcome possible.
Councilwoman Raybould?
And I just wanted to add a few things. We had the representative from BNSF come and give us the briefing, Jeff Davis. He's their state government affairs executive director, to talk about it. But in a nutshell, the trains are going to be about 1.5 miles in length. They're going to be going at speeds of 20 to 30 miles. Mr. Davis has been reaching out to homeowners association and the neighborhood associations, and so I suggested that we get him on the agenda for the mayor's roundtable with the neighborhood associations for October, so he could give a better briefing. I know one thing that we did discuss is there any funding in the Railroad Transportation Safety District budget to allow us to go out and have a feasibility study done on converting some, not all, but maybe 1, 2, 3 of those crossings to a quiet zone, and to see if that is feasible, because particularly on the eastern areas, neighborhoods, there's been rapid growth in residential housing, and some of those neighborhoods that are now there have never known a railroad coming through their area. So it is going to be an issue with them. And for the first time since I can recall in a long time, on the Railroad Transportation Safety District meeting, we had people actually testify. Normally, we had a number of neighbors testify, wanted to get more information about the horns. By federal, we have to follow federal guidelines, federal safety guidelines when it comes to the horns. And, think of, I kind of drove along Highway 2 in the areas, and there's some neighborhoods that it is really going to be impactful at. And I know that, I believe, James and Michael, you also had follow-up conversation, and Richard also had follow-up conversation. So it will be something that we are closely monitoring and trying to make sure the neighborhoods are kept apprised of that. But the other considerations, we're just looking and reviewing several of the crossings, and that we continuously upgrade and look at, and as well as Hickman Bridge repair. That's a relatively new overpass, and it already needs some not too significant repairs, but otherwise it was just a busy week. And for everyone, it is National Rail Safety Week starting next week, September 21st through the 27th, and we had a proclamation, and it's an important awareness.
Thank you. Councilwoman Washington?
Thank you, Chairman Bowers. I have a question about, has the RTSD and BNSF responded to the suggestions? I've heard it a couple of times, the suggestion that they route the train like up north and down east. I mean, take away circuitous route around.
I did talk to them about that, and the fact of the matter is, that route and the rails that would take them there belong to a different company.
That is really good to know. I was
Yep.
curious if they would be willing to put that in writing so that we could clearly share that with constituents who
Well,
ask for that route.
But the point I'd like to make is, we could ask all day long, but they're going to go through.
I'm not
Southern
looking for them
Lincoln,
to make
so,
any change in their route. I'm looking for the information so that I can clearly respond to
Yes.
constituents.
And they-
Because if they don't get the answer, then they keep asking. I want to get the information
And just to
out.
give you also an idea of the scope of a quiet zone study, to study the quiet zone at all the intersections, somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000.
It's very expensive.
Very expensive. That's just the study, not any action on the quiet zones.
Right.
But
So,
I wanted to address your question. We also had a representative of OPPD, because, they did go out through the bid process, and Union Pacific Railroad had been the winner of that bid for many, 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 many years. And they do a routine bid, and so for the first time in a long time, BNSF was actually competitive. So that's the primary reason for them to switch to
Right.
BNSF.
And
But-
I think that's great. I really want to make sure that information is
in
shared.
writing.
If they don't answer the question, then people will continue to ask it.
the other part of the answer, though, is if they were to go a longer route, it would cost them more, and they would not be able to make the bid
Oh, right,
that they made. They did. so.
Yeah.
right. I mean, all of those things are good points to share with the public.
Perfect. Moving on to Parks and Rec with Councilman Christensen.
Well, the biggest issue, the two biggest issues, I think, in that meeting, one, I'll start with the smallest one first, our golf report. More rounds of golf than anticipated have been played. So our golf program seems to be doing all right this year. Maybe it's one of the few things people find they can do, so they go do it. So, but the other thing that took up quite a bit of time was the proposal for a recycling facility at on South 27th Street. and Tamarin Ridge, so Porter Park. And there was quite a bit of discussion. There was people from the neighborhood there who were concerned about light and noise in the evening times, as well as traffic considerations. And there was quite a bit of discussion on how to remediate the situation. And the RTSD, excuse me, we're not on RTSD, the Parks and Rec Advisory Board voted to give this back to LTU and to come back with some recommendations again about how we can minimize the impact of the facility on the neighborhood. Anything you want to add to that? Is that
No, I think that's exactly right. I think as the city council knows,
you better come up here and say something here so we can all hear you.
And when you come forward, would you clearly state what the proposal of LTU is?
absolutely, yeah. Lynn Johnson, Lincoln Parks and Recreation. I think as the city council knows that LTU is looking at changing how they offer free recycling locations. They're going from what I think is 19 at this time down to either 4 or 5. They've been looking for publicly owned sites to place these. And so sometimes that's LPS. In this instance, it's a piece of city-owned property that the Porter Park improvement, it's a dumbbell-shaped piece of property. The western boundary of the property touches on South 27th Street. It's just south of, there's an LAS substation at that location. And so we have been exploring with LTU the possibility of doing a larger scale recycling site in that western portion of the property that would have access from South 27th Street. We've been working with LTU. There was a neighborhood meeting a week and a half ago, 10 days ago, to talk about this. There are residences that are about 200 feet away from this location, so obviously they have questions and concerns about what Councilman Christensen said about lighting and noise and the visual aesthetics of the site. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board voted to redirect it back to the Facilities and Infrastructure Committee to look at some additional landscaping, to look at extending the fencing, perhaps to look at berming along the eastern edge of the site to provide some screening ultimately between the residences and that site. We did work, I know the City Council may have questions about the status of that piece of property. It is a city-owned piece of property that came to the city through the subdivision process. And as I say, the eastern portion of the site has been developed as a neighborhood park. It's a little bit of an unusual site because there's a large wetland that essentially runs through the center portion of it. And the master plan that we had done for the site many years ago looked at the possibility of having an open lawn play area in the western portion of the site where the recycling station is being proposed. Because of the grading off of the backyard of the homes and the proximity of the wetland, there's not an easy way to get a walkway between the eastern portion of this site and this western area. It would take significant grading and some significant retaining walls to make that happen. And so essentially we've been cooperating with LTU to investigate the potential of this site. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board will be responsible for making a recommendation to the departments and to the administration about placement of this recycling site in this location. If it is located in this site, ideally construction, their preference is construction would start in the fall and potentially this site would be open in the spring of 2021. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about it.
Any follow-up questions for Lynn or Roy?
I do. I'm trying to get to the county assessor's site to look down at the site, but I'm curious. So if the parkland came to the city through the subdivision process and it's managed by Parks and Rec, are there any deed restrictions on using that land for something other than recreation?
We asked the law department that exact question because we wanted to make sure that we didn't have, for example, dedicated parkland issues. There's not land and water conservation funds that have been used in that site. Their interpretation is that it was land that was deeded to the city with the intent of at least a portion of it being used for parkland, but they don't consider it to be dedicated parkland, that they consider it to be, it's a fine distinction, and we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with this interpretation, but their interpretation was that it's a city-owned piece of property on which neighborhood park improvements have been made.
And when, because usually this is, the developer hands it over, it's usually for open space. And the fact that there's any wetland on the area tells me that it had a purpose. So open space can be easily used for recreation and also for, flood mitigation and other things like that. So I'm a little concerned about a recycling center going in and then berming and everything else. I love the idea of berming to landscape it, but then I have some concerns about how much more water and or silt that you're moving into the wetlands. I mean, it'll be a very complicated landscaping issue to bring something like this into that area. So thank you for sending it back to LTU. I'll be watching this one.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll move into individual council members who need to talk to department heads. Councilwoman Raybould, is there anyone you'd like to talk to?
David Carey.
Okay. Councilman Christensen? Councilwoman Ward?
Jennifer Brinkman and Lynn Johnson, please.
Councilwoman
Yeah,
Washington?
Jennifer Brinkman's here. I didn't see her, so.
She's probably listening.
I'm sorry, who'd you say? Oh.
Dr. Johnson.
Awesome. All right, we'll break and we'll meet back at 3 o'clock for our meeting. Thank you.